Welcome to the Podkey Summary of Improve Your Prompts by Hill Climbing with Evaluations from WWDC 2026. Today's thread is really about one deceptively simple question. How do you know your AI evaluator is actually judging things the way a human would? The big themes are drift between model and expert ratings, a more honest way to measure agreement with Cohen's kappa, and a very practical process of improving prompts, one change at a time. There's also a useful reminder that better scores in one area can quietly make another area worse, and that tiny datasets can flatter you more than they should. One of the clearest warnings here is evaluation drift. That's when the model acting as judge starts rating systematically differently from expert humans. So even if the numbers look tidy on paper, the two are slowly separating. The example in the transcript is small but pretty revealing. Across a 10-sample evaluation, the model kept giving higher usefulness scores than the human did. And once that bias is there, adding more samples doesn't magically fix it. It can actually make the aggregate mismatch more obvious over time. So the problem isn't just whether the model gets a few items wrong, it's whether its whole scoring habit is leaning in the wrong direction. This is where Cohen's kappa comes in, and honestly, it's one of those metrics that sounds more intimidating than it is. Raw accuracy can be misleading, especially when the score distribution is lopsided and the model can agree with a human partly by luck. Cohen's kappa adjusts for that chance agreement, so it gives you a cleaner read on whether the model judge is truly aligned with the human judge. The target they set is 0.6, which the speaker frames as a meaningful level of agreement by standard statistical practice. That matters because it turns alignment from a vibe into a threshold. You're not just saying, well, this seems close enough. You have a number to beat. The improvement process here is basically hill climbing, which is a nice plain English name for making a change, measuring the result, and keeping the change only if it helps. In practice, that meant repeatedly revising the judge's prompt by adding clearer context, better examples, and more explicit scoring instructions. Over several rounds, those revisions pushed the alignment scores above the target. The important part is the discipline of it. You treat prompt wording as an experimental variable, not as mystical prose that you keep fiddling with until you feel lucky. A really useful feature in Xcode 27 is the ability to run two evaluations side by side. One is your baseline control. The other is your experimental version with the modified prompt. And that setup makes it much easier to see what your specific change actually did. In the transcript, that comparison showed the new prompt improved relevance alignment, which sounds like a win. But usefulness dropped, which is the kind of result that keeps this work honest. You don't get to declare victory just because one chart went up. This trade-off is one of the most practical takeaways. Relevance is about whether the tags actually reflect the book's plot or themes. Usefulness is about whether those tags work well as search terms. Those sound related, and they are, but they are not interchangeable. The transcript shows that when the prompt was made more detailed to improve relevance, usefulness took a substantial hit. That's a very real product problem. A tag can be beautifully faithful to a book and still be kind of useless when somebody is trying to find that book. So the next iteration has to balance both, instead of optimizing one dimension so hard that it breaks the other. There's also a strong scientific experiment mindset running through all of this. The framework encourages changing one variable per iteration, like only adjusting the prompt wording and leaving everything else alone. That sounds almost boring, but it's incredibly useful because it lets you attribute score changes to a specific cause. If you rewrite the prompt, swap the model, and alter the dataset all at once, then good luck figuring out what actually helped. Control and experimental groups aren't just for middle school volcano projects. They're doing real work here. Another interesting piece is tool augmentation for on-device tag generation. They added a lookup tool that supplies author and title information, with the idea that richer context should help the model generate better tags. And the evaluation did show better performance with the tool than without it. The catch is that the tool wasn't invoked consistently across all samples. So now there's a debugging question sitting underneath the performance gain. In other words, the helper seems helpful. The model just isn't always remembering to ask for help. A big constraint here is dataset size. The current evaluation set has only 13 book review pairs, and that's just not much room to understand how the system behaves across varied inputs. With a dataset that's small, drift can be easy to miss, and edge cases can stay hidden simply because they never show up. The suggested fix is to use the Sample Generator API to build a broader synthetic dataset, so the evaluator sees a wider range of scenarios that look more like the real world. I also like that they didn't stop at default averaging. They built a custom aggregation that tracks mean, standard deviation, and Cohen's kappa. That gives a more complete picture, where the central score is, how spread out the ratings are, and how well the model and human raters actually align. That richer view is what helps guide the next hill climbing step, because you can see whether a change improved consistency, alignment, or just the average in a misleading way. The Sample Generator API also does more than bulk up the dataset. For agentic apps, it can generate diverse input-output pairs automatically, which is a practical way around the usual problem of not having enough curated examples. And when you combine that with tool call evaluators, you can systematically test whether auxiliary tools are being invoked correctly across lots of use cases. That's especially relevant here, because it turns the tool invocation issue from a hunch into something you can measure. The through line in all of this is pretty grounded. Measure alignment carefully. Change one thing at a time, and don't trust a tiny dataset to tell you the whole story. And if your AI judge keeps grading on a curve no human agreed to, it's probably time for another prompt revision. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.